The Portfolio Composer, episode 229.
You're listening to the Portfolio Composer podcast with your host and coach, Garrett Hope, where he teaches you what it takes to master the business end of writing music through mindset, marketing, and business skills. Make sure to sign up for the newsletter at theportfoliocomposer.com for exclusive offers, business insights, and information not shared on the podcast. And now, for this episode of the Portfolio Composer.
I like to think that this is something that we've worked on for a long time, but I think ultimately the person who's kind of wrong in the situation will always, at some point, whether it takes half hour or 4 hours, will always kind of sheepishly come back and apologize. So that always helps, because then, you're like, okay, let's do this. Let's put our pants back on and let's actually get this done. But we have a lot of respect for each other. And I think that there hasn't been anything that's really kind of broken the system yet.
This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the music notation software from Steinberg. Just released, Dorico Pro 3 is a major new version with game-changing advances in note input, notation, and engraving. Also available from Steinberg is Dorico Elements, an entry-level application that packs all of the essential power of Dorico Pro into a simple, streamlined package that is ideal for those getting started. Find out more later in the show.
Hello, and welcome to episode 229 of the Portfolio Composer podcast. I'm your host, your coach, and your teacher, Garrett Hope. I've been working with a lot of composers one-on-one lately, and if you have questions or if you need a little bit of encouragement, if you need help clearing the fog of your mindset issues and getting yourself out of the way as you build your career, send me an email, hit me up. I would love to work with you and help you with that as you go along the journey, because we build our own roadblocks, and what I can do as your coach is I can help you deepen the learning and further the action so you can get to the next step, the next milestone, whatever that goal is in your career. Today's a very exciting episode. I have the fortune to have interviewed Ian and Sophia Hultquist. And yes, they are married, but they own and operate two independent music businesses. Drum and Lace is Sophia Hultquist. Sophia is an Italian composer and performer that creates music for film, TV, and media. Her live performances oscillate between electronica and chamber music, often with spatial audio elements. Ian Hultquist is an American film composer who has made a name for himself scoring films, TV, and documentaries for Netflix, HBO, CNN, and National Geographic. Together, they have co-scored projects such as the HBO documentary At the Heart of Gold, and most recently, the Apple TV Plus original series, Dickinson. We speak a lot in this episode about the intricacies of collaboration and how they've set up their business entities to work together. And what comes up in this conversation, this was recorded at the end of 2019, is the new California law AB5, or what's called the gig worker law. And this came into effect on January 1 of this year, 2020. And in summary, what it does basically is it means all contract employees now needed to be treated as W-2 employees, meaning they need to receive benefits and all the other workers' rights that come along with being a full employee of a company. This law was written with gig workers in mind, primarily Lyft and Uber drivers and others, but it has direct ramifications for the creative types, especially composers and performers, because a lot of the work we do is not as employees, but as independent contractors. So at the end of the year, we would receive a 1099 for income generated, and then that would be filed in our taxes under a Schedule C, or your business would file that as income. But now companies, if you score for media or you have a commission, they're required to have you as an employee, and this has really complicated the issue. So we will discuss that, and just so you know, AB5 is currently in effect as I record this. You'll get a lot out of this interview. I hope you enjoy. Hello, Ian, and hello, Sophia. Welcome to the Portfolio Composer.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Hello. Yeah, it's really my pleasure. I'm very excited to speak with the two of you. I'm going to start by asking a question that I've been asking all the guests recently. And it comes from the name of the podcast, The Portfolio Composer. The name portfolio is stolen from the business and investment world with the idea
that we have to have income producing assets in various different classes. You diversify your portfolio. And I think as creative individuals, we do this kind of naturally as we're building our lives. So we have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So I want to ask the two of you, what are in your portfolios as creative individuals? What are you doing to make money?
That's pretty clever because I think literally yesterday or 2 days ago, someone tweeted the definition of a composer in 2019 means composer, music editor, producer, orchestrator, arranger, instrumentalist. And it just kept going and going and going. I know for me personally, I mainly work as a phone composer. That is my main source of income now. Super lucky and grateful that I'm able to say that. However, inside of those jobs, like I am doing, 3 or 4 jobs at once sometimes. I'm doing a lot of editing. I'm playing a lot of things myself. I'm producing everything myself, mixing everything myself usually. And then I also do production and additional instrumentation for some other bands. For instance, there's a band called Dear Boy here in LA that I have a pretty good relationship. And then each time they have a new release, there's a sprinkle of Ian somewhere in the tracks.
Nice. And anything else? No royalties or streaming or anything like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like there is that part of it, but up until recently, that hasn't really been an income that I can rely on. It's more of like, oh, wow, this month actually did pretty well on our ASCAP royalties. But it's just, there's no way of ever knowing what that's going to be. It's literally every time you get a new distribution, it's totally a surprise. So thankfully, in the past year, because I feel like I've worked on so many projects that are actually out on the air now, they're starting to add up to something that actually helps out quite a bit. But up until recently, like it was not money that was really going to make much of a difference.
And what about for you, Sophia?
On my end, I feel like it's not as much as it used to be kind of when I first started doing work and doing things as drum and lace. But, it can vary from anything from film work to then I still work a lot within fashion, whether it's licensing tracks for a fashion company that has a lookbook or a commercial or writing things for them. So, essentially doing ad work. I do also just, do licensing my own stuff so far. I work with theater. I've worked with dance companies. I perform. And the performances range from anything from a DJ set to, which, is just kind of like a extension of what I do. But like my main performances are whether it's like an ambient set or then playing a festival. So that keeps things interesting and keeps me kind of like out of the studio, as well as providing an extra source of income, which is, kind of like a few times a month playing a show helps because it's just kind of, I don't think of the performances as work really. So it's just kind of getting paid to do something fun. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to think, that's mainly it. Like
that's a lot.
Yeah. And I've been doing some, like not really that much session work, but I do sing on things for people, or I've collaborated on things for people and have produced a few local acts, but that's kind of it.
Wow. I'm really curious about the fashion thing. So you're the first composer I've met who is doing work within the fashion industry. Tell me how that started for you.
It actually, it's in a way, I don't know how I had this instinct back about 5 years ago, but I was in New York and I was working as an in-house composer somewhere and wasn't really doing my own music as drum and lace yet. And I wanted to get back into scoring because it's something that I'd kind of put on the side for when I went to grad school and when I was working. And I finally felt like I was ready to kind of jump back into composing for visual media on my own. And to be honest, the idea, especially being in New York, and then the idea of just kind of like trying to jump into scoring features or scoring the way that I am now was really daunting because I felt like I just had no connections. So I've always been a huge fan of fashion. And, growing up in Italy, I feel like it was something that was just kind of around me without me even really realizing it. And a bunch of girlfriends in New York were starting fashion brands. And I was finding them struggling to find music because they didn't have time to go and look for like royalty-free music online, but they couldn't afford to license like a band song. And I kind of researched it a little bit and there was nobody, there's a few people and it's increased a little bit, but there isn't anyone that was like specifically doing like music for fashion. And I was like, you know what? If anything, this is something that I feel like I could get started in. And it really kind of helped start everything, to be honest. And to this day, it kind of continues. And I have a few people that I've collaborated with throughout the years that I still work with that come back to me and I've dialed it back a little bit just because, to be honest, the fashion schedule and the way that the fashion world works, music is always, people always say music is an afterthought, but it's like very much an afterthought, not by their fault, just because there's a lot more going on. So it was a little bit too demanding and just couldn't really make a living off of, working even like 2 or 3 fashion seasons a year. So
that plus other things too.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, you just said like 5 things that I kind of floored me a little bit. You grew up in Italy? Let's start there.
Yes, I'm Italian. I don't sound like it. But
no, not at all.
Yeah, I'm from Florence, Italy.
Okay. First of all, your American accent is totally Midwest. You just fit right in. How did that come to be? How did you end up in LA and New York then?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that really got me out of Italy is that when I was in school, I, was in bands and did music, and I had a jazz singing teacher who had gone to Berkeley. And I think like I was looking at American colleges as, honestly at the time as a way to get out of Italy and just kind of like, because I knew I wanted to do music, or I knew I wanted to do something that just wasn't available for me back home. So I think it was just worked really, really hard in high school to be able to like have kind of the stats to be able to then apply to Berklee College of Music. And I got in, and it was just one of those like no brainers. I was like, this is where I have to go. And, promised my dad I would go to law school eventually, all the promises you make. But I just at 18 was just like, okay, I'm going to go to America. And I left and have found a way to stay here since. So that was about 15 years ago.
Oh, well, that's brilliant. Okay, Ian, I promise I'm going to ask you questions.
No
Hold on a little bit. All right.
She's more interesting than I am. It's okay.
Yes, I get it. My wife's that way too. All right. So I'm really interested in the cutthroat nature of this fashion industry and how you were able to use the kind of music that you were already doing, like the DJ stuff and other things. And just kind of out of morbid curiosity, was it a little bit like The Devil Wears Prada or anything like that?
Well, so what's funny is that I actually started DJing to be able to do more fashion things, because it's like I was seeing that the appeal and the wonder of composing custom music for fashion was getting lost on a lot of these fashion people. Again, It's just because it's not their job to care about music. But they, to them, it didn't make a difference. Like if you had, like the idea of having something that like worked for the brand, like clicked for some people, but it didn't for everyone. So it was one of those things where they'd be like, well, I don't need custom music, but like I need somebody to do music for my party. So I essentially taught myself how to DJ based off of that. And I haven't actually performed, like I'm more of like a performer, normal performer before that. But like so the DJing was kind of like something that I'd always put on the back burner. But I mean, it's not as, like I never got to be kind of in the weeds the way that movie does, and the way that, you think of the fashion world, just because literally the way that my involvement would start would be like, okay, we're like 2 weeks out from our runway show, and we just realized we don't have music. Do something, like essentially
Right.
Be like, can you put together a playlist? One time I wrote a 30-minute soundscape
Oh my
for a
goodness.
presentation, which, like at the time I was like, oh, wow, I'm getting paid to write a 30-minute, but it's 30 minutes of music that somebody's just, people are talking over, and it's just models like standing around.
Yeah.
So, but it was very fulfilling. And I love the fashion medium just because it's all about aesthetics, and it's all about just like bringing beauty to the world. And, people think of fashion as superficial, but some of the fashion films I've gotten to work on have been some of the most creative, both in subject matter and in color palettes and in everything that I've done. And a lot of those, even if they are more of passion projects, are the ones that always get me more work. So, there's a lesson to be learned there, that even if something is low paying, as long as there's a creativity there, you'll always thrive if you're able to do your most creative work.
Right. And even though your music really is in the background, if it wasn't there, then the whole thing wouldn't work right. Like they still need the music.
Yeah, actually, there's one of my favorite anecdotes or stories is just a few years ago, there was a fashion presentation in Milan by this brand called Miu Miu. And all of a sudden, halfway through the presentation, the music cut out. So the models had to do everything without music. And I think it was the first time that people were like, oh, wow, music is really important. But, it takes that kind of thing to happen for people to be like, wow, the music is really helping here.
Yeah, for
which is
sure.
interesting.
Ian, tell me how you got the opportunity to start working in television and movies and soundtracks. How did you get that first gig?
So straight out of college, I had started a band with my friends, and that really kind of took over my life for a few years. I had majored in film scoring from Berkeley, and it was something that I really wanted to do, but I was also a lot younger than I am now. And the thought of getting to tour and play music was more exciting. And thankfully, I actually had the opportunity to do it. So I kind of just started following that path. But I think after a few years of pretty heavy and chaotic touring, and I was finally at home on break, that's where the bug kind of came back. And I was like, maybe I don't want to be in a band forever. Maybe there's more to music world than just this. And I kind of just started searching around and seeing if there was any opportunity out there to start scoring from the complete bottom, doing short films, commercials, anything I could find for almost no money usually. And it started with just asking a lot of friends. Like I would email people from high school that I hadn't talked to in 4 years that may have been working in LA, just being like, is there anything that you know of that I could possibly do? And thankfully, a few people actually responded and got me some of my first short films. On top of that, Sophia was going to NYU grad school and would actually kind of pass me, if any students were looking for someone to short film, she would forward some of those emails to me so I could kind of try and reach out and see if they let me. And a couple of those worked out. And it's funny to see how some of those, there's one director named David Sidorov who made this short film called Die School Reunion, but people that were in that short have now gone on to do the show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend that was on CW and things like that. So it's really weird. These people that I met really, really early on in my career, we've all kind of slowly grown together over the past decade or so. But the two big breaks for me were first a documentary called Ivory Tower came in, which was directed by Andrew Rossi. And now we've worked on maybe 8-9 projects together. And that one was literally pure luck. We were at a party and a friend of a friend who I was talking to, who knew I was trying to get into scoring, who knew I was in the band, said, oh, my friend Andrew's looking for a composer for his documentary. And it literally just happened like that, which I know is kind of like 1 in a million these days. A lot of friends of ours might have a conversation like that, but to actually have it follow through into a real project is a really rare thing. So that happened, I want to say fall 2013. And then around that same time, my band Passion Pit was filming a music video in Los Angeles. And it was a little bit bigger of a budget, more of a production. There was an actual cast that was in the video. And one of those was the actor David Dasmalchian, who I didn't know previously, aside from being that crazy guy in The Dark Knight. And I'm a gigantic Batman nerd, so I struck up a conversation with him. And he's one of the most friendly people I've ever met in my life. And we kind of just became friends. And at that point, he had been working a lot. He'd been starting to do more things, but he was also a writer. And he had a script that was semi-autobiographical called Animals that he was trying to get made into a feature. And I told him, I was like, well, I'm touring in the band, but I kind of see my window in this closing soon. And I'd like to kind of think about what the next steps are. And I really want to try scoring a feature. And he was like, okay, if this happens, let's try and see how it goes. And I think a year and a half, 2 years later, it actually got made. And thankfully they kept me on board and I got to do it.
Wow.
So those are my first two features, one being a documentary, one being a narrative. But those were the first two things that really kind of solidified my feet a little bit in the scoring world. And I was able to kind of pick up the pace from there on out.
So you are inadvertently validating a point that I make repeatedly on this podcast, that it's really about the relationships you have. And it seems to me, hearing that story, that you invested heavily in actually getting to know these people and you've made friends with them and they're still your friends and you're still making work together. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of those early relationships have, especially on the documentary side, because Andrew Rossi then introduced me to Aaron Lee Carr, whose career is completely blown up over the past few years. and they're so prolific. And it's a project a year, if not more than one. And thankfully they keep hiring me back because I guess we just have that relationship now, and we trust each other and we understand each other, what we both want to get out of each project. I can't speak enough to like having relationships like that with filmmakers and producers who trust you and want to work with you, and you get to be creative and try something new each time.
Yeah, absolutely. And now the two of you are working together on a score for... Is Apple making this? Are they creating movie content now? I keep seeing their ads on Hulu.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it's one of the first 4 shows that's like an Apple TV Plus original that just came out. It's 4, right?
It was one of the first 4 that came out.
There's more coming.
We were part of the first wave.
Wow. Yeah. And is this a feature-length film, or is it a miniseries, or what is it?
It's a TV series. So it's season 1, and it's 10 30-minute episodes. And we got renewed for season 2, which we're also excited to be on board with. So
congratulations.
Thanks.
Yeah, okay, so I haven't seen it yet. For the people who are listening, this is the show Dickinson, and it explores the life of a young Emily Dickinson.
Yes.
And the trailer is mesmerizing. Is that your music in the trailer?
It depends which one. There was a couple of trailers that came out. I think one of them had a little bit of our music, but most of them were all songs.
Okay. No, I think the one I heard was not songs, so it must have been yours.
That might be us then.
Yeah, Apple put out a lot of content, and there's been just a lot of content kind of like around Dickinson's release, and it's been very buzzy. And I think also the fans of the show and the fans of Haley Steinfeld, who plays Emily Dickinson, have taken it upon themselves to create fan trailers and fan things. So it's been really exciting, and have completely lost track of what's happening.
Sure. Well, I get the understanding that it crosses into fantasy in a little bit when you're in her imagination. Is that true?
Yeah, the whole show kind of borders on this line of realism and fantasy and Emily's internal world. And you're basically kind of seeing everything through her eyes. And because she's such a creative individual, it's kind of a given that we're going to really toe that line.
Yeah, and I think that the songs and needle drops that are in the show, which are awesome, and we've been working with a really great music supervisor called DeVoe Yates, and he's amazing. But I feel like the songs get used as a way of kind of like within the scenes where there's things happening and whatnot, whereas our score always seems to come in at times when it's more about the internal monologue that the characters are having, or more of kind of like the way that they're feeling. And I think that what the showrunner Elena Smith wanted us to do with the music, because she wanted kind of a contemporary score, is that to highlight the fact that Emily's ideas and the way that Emily is an artist and poet is a parallel to what she would be like today, and that she was very much ahead of her time. And that, a lot of concepts are universal and they transcend time, like something that she felt in 1850 is still relevant today. So I think that that's where like the kind of anachronistic score really helped. And we were able to really use elements such as my voice and others to be able to create this internal kind of world within Emily's mind.
Wow.
And yeah.
I'm really looking forward to watching that.
No, also, I'd say, I feel like with all new TV series, it's like the first few episodes are kind of like setting you up, and it's kind of like the exposition, it's like, oh, here are the characters, like here's what's going on. But as the season progresses, it gets, it is a comedy, but it gets a lot darker. And I feel like season 2 is going to pick up where season 1 ends, which, all I keep telling people is like the first 3 or 4 episodes are great, but like wait until you get to like episodes like 5 onwards, because the tone shifts and it becomes a lot more dire and a lot more interesting, I think.
Ooh, fun. I like dark shows like that. This episode is sponsored by Dorico, the future of scoring. And we want to feature real Dorico users so you can know that real composers out in the world today are using Dorico to make their careers happen.
My name is Ricardo Matzinhos, and I'm a horn player, I'm a teacher, and also a composer. As a composer, I love the way, for the first time, I can write music directly in Dorico. Because in other software, sometimes I feel that I cannot be really creative. For the first time on a software, I simply started to play on the piano without thinking about the key signature, about the metric. Let's simply play like if I was playing my own instrument. And then, of course, the way you can write the music and then adjust it, like make a specific rhythm longer, shorter, like if you were making notes on a piece of paper.
Would you recommend Dorico?
Yes, for sure. And there are some people starting to use Dorico in Portugal, most of them because of me. A few months ago, a friend asked me if I was interested in giving some Sibelius presentation. But I told him I don't use Sibelius anymore. I don't use Sibelius. Why? So what are you using? I told him about Dorico. And the Portuguese teachers need to make mandatory trainings every year. So I started to make these Dorico training sessions with teachers, some composers, some are not really composers, they just write exercises for their students. And actually, I convinced the major music publisher in Portugal to adopt Dorico. I really feel that we are just on the surface of this software. In the beginning, if you went to the Facebook Dorico page, there are a few people asking for things, how can I make this or that in Dorico? And there were some people complaining, oh, Dorico isn't able to do this or that. And now those voices are going away and more people are seeing the light of Dorico. So I'm really looking forward what Dorico 3 will bring us.
The kind folks at Dorico have set up a special web page so you can go and download a free 30-day trial copy of Dorico. So go and do that. I have been using the program and I'm absolutely in love with it. Go to dorico.com/TPC. So I'm always captivated by collaborative partners that are writing music for shows. And as a creative individual myself and as a composer, I struggle with even the idea of sharing space in that way. How do the two of you work that out? How do you decide who's going to write what? Or describe your collaboration for me.
So we've actually been collaborating in a not as official capacity for a really long time. I think back in like 2008, 2009.
It's like 2009, 2010.
Yeah. I think Sophia was scoring a short animated film and I was kind of helping out more as like a producer, just kind of helping her get sounds locked in and stuff like that. So I think that's really where we started. And then from there, we actually had a side project called Aceland for a while where we released an EP and played a lot of shows around New York, played South by one year. So we've always kind of had that collaborative spirit. It was always kind of more like for fun or just for the hell of it. But it wasn't really until I think 2015, Angie Rossi reached out about scoring The First Monday in May, which was his documentary about the Met Gala. And he actually, I think he was maybe the first one who said, I think it'd be great if Drum and Lace was involved with this as well. So that may have been our first like full-on official co-score.
Yeah, and we've gone on to do a lot. And honestly, I don't think that we've ever even thought about, because to this day, I don't think we've done it. Never think that we thought about it as like, okay, you take these cues and I take these cues. It was always kind of like the deal that we would just work on everything 50-50 and, at the same time in the same room. And I know that for some people, and we've heard from knowing of other collaborative partnerships, that some people work better where it's like, okay, I'm going to take half of the movie and you'll take this half of the movie and then we'll come together. But for us, it's just, I think it saves so much time for us to just be in the loop about everything all at once. And, even right now, as we're talking to you, we're working actually on another TV show together. And we are literally sitting at the same desk, just like side by side at the same keyboard. And that's kind of what we do when we work together. It's just one of us might start a cue and then the other will flesh it out and vice versa. But it's pretty seldom that like somebody will do something completely on their own.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's forced us to think about studio design a lot. Like even right now we're in our detached garage, it's kind of where I usually work mostly. And now we have a new studio that we just built for Sophia to use primarily. But, studios are always built to kind of be around one person working. But because we've been doing so often lately, I've kind of had to rethink how I feel like this room should be. And I think literally in a couple of weeks, I might completely rearrange it to try and open it up so it feels more welcoming to have two people in here at all times.
Yeah. And I think honestly, up until recently, we wouldn't have been able to do, I take half of the movie and you take the other just for, not only like physical constraints of workspace, but also just, it's expensive to have duplicate systems. Like it's expensive to have the same exact plugins and to have the same exact software. And for a while I was doing stuff in Ableton and Pro Tools and Ian was doing stuff in Cubase and Pro Tools. And it's like, now we're both on Cubase, but it's these things where it's like, it's hard when you're trying to really share things. And we really want to make everything feel like it's both of us all the time.
Yeah, I bet. Is there ever been a time when you've gotten just really frustrated and you had to work through some collaborative kind of, I'm struggling to find the right word, but some like collaborative conflict?
Oh, yeah.
And what I'm really curious about is then how did you get through that?
Yeah, I mean, literally every project we do, there's at least a day, if not a couple days, where words are yelled and doors maybe get slammed. Temperatures rise.
Shit hits the fan. Yeah.
So how do you deal with it?
I think a lot of it's just being patient, taking a deep breath, and maybe taking the dogs on a walk for a half hour and then coming back and seeing how it goes.
But I think we're also both really good at eventually, and I think I like to think that this is something that we've like worked on for a long time, but I think ultimately the person who's kind of wrong in the situation will always at some point, whether it takes half hour or 4 hours, will always kind of sheepishly come back and apologize. So that always helps because then, you're like, okay, like, let's do this. Let's put our pants back on and like, let's actually get this done. But I think it's just, we have a lot of respect for each other. And I think that there hasn't been anything that's really kind of broken the system yet.
Well, let's hope it doesn't happen, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. It's funny too, because a lot of times some of our arguments aren't necessarily at each other. It will be like, I often get super frustrated with myself while I'm working because I feel like I know what the idea is and I can't get it out. I can't express it properly. And then Sophia will maybe get mad at me because I'm so frustrated with myself and that starts an argument. So it's funny how those things can happen. It's not always like, oh, she thinks this and I think this. A lot of times it's like, I am just like having an issue internally that I can't figure out. And then it kind of spreads out to the rest of the room.
So the two of you are musical partners and basically business partners too, which I'll get into in a second, but you're married. And I love my wife dearly. And we do a lot of things together and it works great. But being creative and composing is so emotional and you're so vulnerable and we're kind of digging into our inner selves deeply. And you bring then with that all the emotional baggage of marriage. So how does that added complexity add into the collaboration? Really is what I want to ask.
Well, I think that it's, I think exactly what you said, like we've allowed each other to be able to be vulnerable with each other. And it's like, there's never a time if I'm starting a cue that I feel embarrassed, like there's nothing that I can do that I feel like I can do, like play a wrong note or play something that then I feel like Ian would judge me on. So I think that that's extremely liberating. And that's something that comes with having kind of like both, partnership and work, but also being in a way like best friends where it's like, like I know this person's, so the fact that like judgment or that kind of judgment is out the door, I think is extremely helpful.
It's a lot of practice too, because we have been collaborating on things for so long that I feel like at this point, we're really comfortable working with one another without it. I think, honestly, for me, I think the most difficult thing with being in a ultimately collaborative relationship when we're living together and working together, it's more just like the time just slips away and like our house is a mess. It's like normal life things is like the hardest thing to keep up with when you're both working on the same thing so intensely that, sometimes if Sophia's really into a project and I have a free day, then like I'll take care of groceries and cleaning up the house, or vice versa. But lately where it's just like we're juggling multiple things at once, like that is where things slip away. So then the studio is great, and then you walk in the house and it's just like a mess, and it's just like, oh God,
Right.
Yeah.
who wants to take over this?
But I think also the key is that we do work, like lately we've been working a lot together, but the majority of what we do is still very much separate. So I think having our own projects and we have separate agents, we have separate people that we work with, and we try to really not step on each other's toes unless it's like something that was explicitly asked by either a producer or a director. So I think that just, having our own identities and being very kind of like staunch about that has really helped, because then it's like you don't feel resentful of one another if you're like, this is who I am and this is what I want to do. And, if Ian has the same thing, then we get to just be happy for each other rather than ever have there be like oh, humph, like, why am I not doing this as well?
Yeah.
It does get really hard though when we need to unplug. Like it gets really hard to not talk about a project over breakfast, like it's hard. But I think we've been able to find a balance. And I think the years that Ian spent on tour allowed for us to also be able to build our creative voices in a way, but at the same time, the separation also made our friendship stronger. So it's been, as Ian said, many years in the making. But
so for people who are just starting new collaborations or are interested in collaborating with someone musically, what recommendations can you give to build that level of trust so that you can start a cue and never be embarrassed?
Patience and honesty. Like if you're doing something, if Sophia's writing something that I don't think is good, or actually usually I'm writing something that she doesn't think is good, she says it right away. She's like, that's not good. Like redo it, try something else. I think we're both such harsh critics to ourselves, but having that extra set really kind of pushes us to be as creative as we can. But it's because we're honest all the time that we can trust each other and know that, okay, I think eventually I'd probably realize like this isn't good either. But having that person there and trusting them right away really helps things move quicker and faster.
And I also really think it's like you need to be friends or really like each other as people before working together, because like there's been times when I've tried to collaborate with people and it's like you can sense the insecurity of people when they're like, oh, look what I can do with this plugin. And it's like, there's something deeper set in there that you're like, I'm not saying trying to show off, but it's like we're here to do a job, and it's like we just both have to be on the same page about what it means emotionally. I mean, I guess that's another thing. It's like you have to find somebody who finds things that resonate the same way. Because music is something so hard to talk about that if the feelings that you and your collaborative partner feel are different, then it's not going to work. Like I think just patience and empathy are really what it comes down to.
Just be a good human to each other.
Yeah. And how do you structure the business? Because I imagine there's Drum and Lace and Sophia as one business, and then there's Ian as another business. And then is there a third business that's the two of you, or are you not integrating these two things? Speaking legal and tax reasons, kind of mixing.
Yeah.
Did our accountant call you?
No, not at all. I'm curious because
how did you know?
So many composers want to know, like, how do I set up the business? And I'm curious how you've done it as collaborative partners.
So as of now, we're both completely separate. I have a loan out company for myself. Sophia is still basically freelance.
I'm still like DBA. I'm still like doing business out.
Yeah.
And we like keeping it separate because like, as we said, we do plenty of projects separately. It just, right now, it's been kind of a trend of getting hired together. However, we've been looking at options for Sophia because, she's doing more and more legit projects. She needs to have some sort of company.
Yeah, or some kind of like liability.
And the options, the kind of standard options that anyone would find if you talk to an accountant, it's like you can do an S Corp, which is what I am, or you can do LLC, which is what, when I was in band world, that's what everyone was.
Yeah.
Like every band had their LLC set up.
I'm an LLC. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We kind of came in being like, well, let's have 2 S Corps then. And our accountants are actually thinking like, that's going to be, you can, absolutely. It's just like, it's a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of headache.
Yeah.
So something we may be doing soon is basically taking my loan out company and umbrellaing
Yeah.
that over myself and then incorporating Drum and Lace into that.
So then we would be kind of like co-partners within the S Corp, but then have our own umbrellas underneath it.
Yeah, totally makes sense.
Yeah. We can still live separately.
Because it is really important, because we have separate agents and we work with separate agencies, you don't want, what we've done in the past is that like they've paid Ian's loan out and then he's paid me, but then it makes it so much easier if like each of our agencies can then just kind of like take care of the accounting on their own so that then it goes into our separate accounts.
Yes.
And, I feel like, going back to this trend of the independence being, I think, what really helps us being able to work together and, essentially be together a lot is that, even normally we have separate bank accounts and then we have joint bank accounts, but it's like, it's very important for us to have our own independent thing because we do different things. Like there's no reason why things from my performance world should fit in with like the pot of the scoring stuff, because that's a separate thing.
Yeah. And there's huge tax benefits for you guys. First of all, forming a legal entity and then putting it under an umbrella company, then so you can pay yourselves and then your health insurance and other things also then become tax write-offs. And there's like lots of layers to this. It gets very complex, but in the end, it benefits you as creatives.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like it's something that now, especially with all the new laws that are being introduced in California, it's something that I think a lot of people need to start thinking about, whether, it's like Bill AB5, which we'll see what happens with things here in California. But even just, there's been more and more changes in like what you can deduct and what you can write off as a, independent contractor. So it's all like very hard to navigate and there's not enough conversation about it. We definitely weren't educated enough.
I like this. This is stuff that we had to figure out fully on our own when the time came. I like that we're talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of listeners in the LA area who are in the media world and they want to know how to do it too. The headquarters of most media creation in the United States is LA.
Mm-hmm.
But the tax situation in California is making it increasingly more challenging to get your business off the ground and to cross the hurdle. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I started my S Corp 5 years ago, so it was a little easier at the time. But especially in the past couple of years, I feel like there's all these new things that keep getting introduced that's just making it more and more difficult. Like, as we always say, like the middle class has been left out and it trickles all the way down to music too. And especially you're either singing on the streets for change or you're Lady Gaga, but everything in between it's a hard thing to figure out.
Yeah.
And also, I think the biggest thing is that California is just such an open market just for freelancers of all types that it's like there's no consideration for music in particular, like especially with this bill AB5 that's, I think was introduced primarily just because California was like, hey, Uber and Lyft, like those kinds of companies are getting all these tax benefits, like let's change that. But then they didn't think about the fact that about making exemptions for musicians. And we're not in the AFM, but I know that the AFM has like a lot of leverage on stuff like that. But, the AFM is not an easy thing to be part of, nor is it advantageous for a lot of people. But then, you get stuck in these situations where it's like, come January, it might be hard to just be like, hey, session player, come over to our detached garage and play a session, because then technically you then essentially are supposed to become their employer.
Can you summarize, to the best of your understanding, what AB5 is? Because there's a lot of listeners who are not in California and may not know what's happening.
I mean, literally, I think it's just they're trying to make the open, like
the gig economy.
Yeah,
Yes.
they're trying to like find a way of making the gig economy more taxable and also like the whole minimum wage situation. But the problem is that, with musicians, it's like we are constantly employing other people to help with us finishing projects that we, it's usually like, if it's over $600, it's a 1099 situation and it's great. And it's like non-binding and it's non-exclusive. But what's going to happen from now on with AB5 is essentially like, if I want to like ask anyone to like mix a score or play on something, and I'm not part of a union and I'm not part of something that's kind of like an organized situation like that, then like essentially I have to become the employer to everyone that I bring in. So, like I was saying, if I have a cellist come in to play, even if it's like $200, like I need to do all the paperwork and essentially legally should have to employ them, have them as like an employee and go through all of those steps, which is unrealistic because it's like losing out on money. And I think the biggest thing that stands out to me is like the touring system of like artists touring through California might change, because it makes it so that, for example, I read a great yesterday. If I wanted to play the bootleg theater and, they paid me like whatever, $300 to play a 45-minute set, then they would technically have to employ me. I would essentially have to do a W-2 for them to be able to pay me or cut me a check for a show.
That's ridiculous.
And you know what? Like, the thing that sucks is that bands are just going to be like, well, then I won't go to California.
Right. Oh, well, what it's going to end up doing is making it more difficult for the independent musician like us.
Yeah, absolutely.
The advantage goes to the large production houses that have in-house teams and the money to make it work.
Yeah, absolutely. Or, they have something that's unionized that's taking care of it. Because then under that umbrella, then like you're already part of an entity that then gets hired out, So
yeah, the union does good work, but there's also problems with the union, as you're describing, because it will price other people out of the market again.
Well, the biggest problem with LA right now is that, like, if you get a film that's non-union or a TV show that's non-union, which
I've still never done a union project out of like 40 projects.
Wow.
Yeah. If you want to record a 16-piece string ensemble, technically, like, you need to do what's called a dark session, because it's like you can't ask the union to do it because it's a non-union project. But then lately, a lot of players won't do non-union projects because they're afraid that a representative from the union is going to show up. Like, if they're in the union, it's such a complicated.
Yeah.
A lot of people are going to Budapest or to other places to record.
Mm-hmm.
And, LA musicians are suffering because of limitations too.
Yeah, I feel like there are some benefits to being part of the union that as a musician could be great. But at the same time, they also want to eat and pay their bills and get paid and live their lives. And, if it was opened up where we could do sessions more freely, like, everyone would do so much more work. And this new bill is just completely putting an even bigger roadblock than is already there.
Yeah. Well, maybe it'll force the industry kind of complete the move away from LA. Many movies are made in Canada now, primarily for financial reasons. And like you said, a lot of live recording is happening in Europe because the orchestras are cheaper. It could just move out of California entirely if it becomes untenable.
Yeah, I mean, Nashville's already giving really great incentives to musicians to record.
Mm-hmm.
We're all moving to Berlin, guys.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I want to ask one last question here as we kind of wrap things up. If you could give one or two pieces of advice to the composers, and they're mostly composers listening to this, that they could take action on today, one or two things they could do right now that'll move their career forward, what would you say?
The first and kind of most obvious is make sure that if somebody Googles you, your website or your SoundCloud or your Spotify come up. Because the number of times that we meet composers and you go to like try to find their work and it's like they're really hard to find. Like, think about if you're like a director, you wanted to hire a composer, like make sure that like even if you don't like social media, that you like have a social media presence and that you like have a website and that your SEO on your website is like the first thing that pops up. If you like type in drum and lace, like the first thing that comes up should be your website, like in my case. So I think that that's something that like I see all the time. And it's now really easy and nearly free to get your music on Spotify and Apple Music.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have music standing around and you're a composer and you don't have a Spotify page, get anything up there.
CD Baby, DistroKid, these are all super low-cost distributors that will send your music right up onto those.
Like, have your music where people can hear it or where like somebody can be like, oh, this person's legit. Like, I think that's my biggest tip. It seems really obvious, but like a lot of people don't think about it.
Okay. That's great advice.
Yeah.
Ian, do you have anything you want to say?
Mine's not as pressing. It's just kind of like a general that I still try and stick to, but it's just like mainly be gracious to people. Don't be a dick. Open yourself up to any opportunity, depending on where you're at. If you think you're too big for a short film, that might not necessarily be true. When I first started, I would do plenty of projects for literally $0 just so I could get my name out there. And it didn't matter that I was in the band that I was in. I would work for free because I wanted to have this new world built around me. And I think remembering that and never thinking like you're over something is important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I think it's really, really, really important to know your composer community. And it's important to know people because, again, if there's issues or if there's things to discuss, like you can come together. But don't just hang out with composers because like composers don't get you work.
Yes. Don't get stuck in the composer bubble.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh,
so many composers we know just hang out with composers. And then they're like, oh, why am I not getting work?
Because you don't know any directors.
Well, also, you just need to meet like normal people. Like it's just, like literally somebody that I ended up working with, I met because our dogs were sniffing butts at the dog park and we started talking. Like you never know who you're going to
You never do.
meet. And also just put it out there. Like if you want to be scoring, then like let people know that you're a composer. Like don't just assume that people will know that. So
can I make a comment on that?
Yeah.
I have been lately really focused on composing for the educational music world, like high school bands and choirs and things. Mm-hmm. Though I love scoring short films and independent films too. I want more of that. But I'm going to these conferences where the band directors are because that's who I need to meet. And a lot of my composer friends are doing similar things. And when we get together, we just want to go get drinks and hang out and get meals. And I'm starting to slowly say, you know what? I love you very much and I want to hang out with you. But I'm not here to be with you.
Yeah.
I'm here to network with the people who will hire me to write new music.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's really important to make that distinction. They're all my friends, and I value them all. But like you said, composers are not going to get other composers new gigs. Maybe referrals, but they're not going to actually hire them.
Right.
Yeah, and it's really important to know other composers because like we've done this plenty in the past where it's like if we can't do something, then we will try to pass it forward to a friend.
Yeah.
And that's when it's important to have a network. But at the same time, it's like, whether it's a festival or, just remember that like you're there to, it's hard to admit, but we're all of us want to get the gig.
Yeah.
So it's highly competitive but as Ian said, as long as you're gracious to one another, like that's also extremely important.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a fine line. Like you want to be part of the community and it's important to do that. And it's important to be somewhat known around this community, but also don't engulf yourself in it. Like keep your friends that you have before you got into scoring. Like talk to them more. They don't only surround yourself by scoring because you will go insane.
Yeah, this is all wonderful advice. I appreciate it so much. And I'm sure our listeners do too. Thank you for your time today. I've enjoyed this conversation so much. Thank you for being vulnerable with me and with the audience and letting us kind of peek behind the curtain of how your collaboration works. It's been really enjoyable.
Great talking to you.
Yeah, great talking to you. Anytime you want to chat, let us know.
Well, maybe we'll do a round 2, or next time I come to LA, we do another interview, or at least get a drink together.
Yeah.
Yes, that sounds great.
This episode of The Portfolio Composer has been supported by Dorico, the music notation software from Steinberg. Whether you're a composer or arranger, a teacher or student, working in music engraving and publishing, or working in producing music for media such as film, TV, and games, Dorico is the tool for you. Dorico comes in 2 versions, Dorico Pro for professionals and Dorico Elements, providing the perfect introduction to the world of scoring. Whichever version you choose, you'll be using software packed full of smart features that produces beautiful results completely automatically, allowing you to get music on the stand more quickly than with any other software. You can bring music into Dorico from your existing software using Music XML or MIDI, and you can try Dorico out completely free of charge for 30 days by downloading a trial version from dorico.com/TPC. Try it today.